Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist / secular / awesome community. And that's Zach Law. That's the official name. That's a real name. This is episode number 113. I'm recording live on September 28th, 2017. I would like to thank Natalie Newell, aka Science Mom, aka co-host of the Science Enthusiast podcast, for being on last week. She's going to fucking QED, y'all. She's going to England. If I were her, I would not come back. So thanks again to my booker, Jeannie, for bringing on tonight's guest, Fred Sims. Fred is one of approximately 1,200 co-hosts of ORLY Radio, and I've heard him talk about the differences between prisons and jails, being a mono person in a poly world, and what exactly a psychotronic film is. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was super awesome to get the invitation. And I also appreciate Jeannie giving me the shout out like, hey, somewhat worthwhile.
Yeah, it's one thing to say to bring someone on, but after they've been on your show, well, your semi-defunct show, RIP Polyaskery, I was like, I can't even find it on iTunes anymore, so it's unfortunate. So I got well, you go ahead. You're the guest. You talk. I'm just going to sit here with my beer.
Oh, no, I was going to say I have that saved on my phone, so I can pull it up anytime I want to listen to myself talk, which is never, so.
Aw. Well, I'm doing sour beers tonight, so I had a cherry one. What was it? Southern Brewing, which is ironically out of Southern Tier out of New York. And then Blackberry Beret, Yeehaw, out of Nashville, out of Tennessee. I was in Nashville a few weeks ago and picked up some beer. It was one of the last ones. So we'll see how it goes. Sometimes you get the single beer. You just don't know what's going to happen.
It's got solid color. It looks good.
Yeah, these beers have interesting color. I drove like 30 minutes out of my way today to pick up a barrel-aged stout with coconuts. We'll see. I'll have that tomorrow. Got to plan ahead. But this is about you, not me. My crazy beer thing, notwithstanding. Probably should be another show. So out of context, quotes from our guest tonight. You're cramming too much in. Dear America, go fuck yourselves. And the Facebook country of Fred doesn't want you. Just to get people warmed up.
I don't remember that you're cramming too much in. That's a solid one.
I can't remember if that was a Polyaskery one or one of the other interviews I listened to, but yeah, I mean, when you have that, you gotta stick with it. So, ORLY Radio. So is that the OR capitalized? Is that the official? I don't want to mess this one up.
That's exactly right. It was born out of the ORLY Owl meme. Basically, the tagline is things that make you go, oh, really? So we talk about everything from politics, current events, science. The rest of my 1,200 co-hosts tend to stay away from the world of sports, but that's usually my forte. It's just, there's not usually a lot that also connects with what we normally talk about in the sports world. That we stay away from, but I'm a sports nut. I love it.
Well, I mean, if you were in on the whole sports politics thing like 6 months, a year ago, then you were ahead of the curve, but now it's pretty much straightforward. I was driving home today and on the back of a minivan, someone actually wrote NFL No Fans League. And I was like, man, I wish I had so few things to worry about in my life that I was like, oh, no, guys are protesting. Oh, I'm so upset. Not my football. That kind of thing. But, it happens.
Yeah, I mean, the DirecTV response is just ridiculous, that they're allowing people to get a refund if they want to because of the protests. Like that be in your everyday life, that taking a knee and trying to bring light on an issue in needs addressed is enough to make you go, yeah, I'm not going to watch this anymore? Or is it that you want the $180 back?
Well, it's damn expensive. I mean, Sunday Ticket is the bonus pack. I think like the bare bones is $270. I think it's like $360 because I do like the red zone. Because I have a friend who's a short attention span. That's perfect for him. So
Hey, I love Red Zone. Red Zone's the best way to watch Sunday football.
Now, ORLY started without you. I had no idea why. But how did you get involved in the show?
ORLY started without me. Andy Cowan is the host, and he was married to a lovely lady named Ren Cowan, whose name is now Ren Cowan Sims, and that's my wife. I've known her since high school. We obviously fell out of touch. She had a life, I had a life. We reconnected, and when we reconnected, I got to meet and hang out with Andy. I listened to the show a little bit, told him that I enjoyed it. I'd love to come on and talk, and he let me. So I started doing the show.
He let you. So I assume no bad blood there. That's one of the most unusual connections.
Yeah, no, they actually have a really amicable divorce. They're still really good friends. He's actually in the other room right there. So it's one of those situations where everybody is gets along great, and we have a decent dynamic when I'm on the show. We talk very well. We kind of bounce things off of each other. Like you said, it's a little difficult with 1,200 co-hosts, but we make it work.
Well, that's good. So did you add your own kind of spin to the show when you came on, or did you just say, all right, I'll go with what these guys are doing?
I think anytime I talk, it's my own spin on anything. It's just the way that my brain works. It just happens to fit in with what they're doing. I mean, I've never attempted to try and, be like that takeover guy. Like, I'm going to come in here and make this all my own. It flows in with the conversations that we have. And usually my viewpoint is, one of the things I really like to do is clarifying questions. So we'll get to the point where, the conversation is really going, and then I just either throw in like a devil's advocate question or a question to really clarify what everyone else is saying, always kind of thinking about who's listening. If this conversation is just for us, that's perfectly fine. But if we're expecting people to listen, maybe there are points where I'm like, hey, can we highlight this or can we highlight that? Because someone else may be like, what the hell are you talking about?
That happens often with me. So who are the other hosts? You mentioned Andy, and is there a normal kind of rotation, or just whoever can show up? And when do you record? Do you actually record live where people can watch or listen to you?
Yeah, absolutely. We do record live on Friday nights, usually about 9:30 if everything's working. We have a YouTube channel that people can check out. We broadcast live via Twitch a lot, and we were doing the Facebook streaming, like the Facebook Live as well, so people can check it out there. And there is a pretty solid rotational cast, and it just depends on who's available any given Friday night. So we have other hosts include longtime co-host David O'Connor, and then other short time hosts like myself, which are Stephen Griffith, Tin, and Amber Bisecker, who is a pretty accomplished author. She has a set of books on Amazon under the name Lana Hart.
So what is the normal kind of setup for the show? Because I saw when I went to iTunes that you had a bunch of like A, B, C, D for each episode. So even though I think we're on episode 164, I feel like you have like 700 episodes.
When I first started, we tried to keep things at a time limit somewhat. So how you say you try to tend to do about an hour, every week or, every show, we were trying to do that same thing. Let's keep it to an hour and a half, figuring most people don't want to sit and listen to, 2 hours of audio every time they sit down to a podcast. The conversations just necessitated lengthy talks, and it would get to, sometimes we'd finish out and there were 3 hours of audio. So Andy made the decision smartly, I believe, to cut it up into segments. And so now we have dedicated segments. You kind of get the intro and like a main story and, you know, breakdown of what's been going on. And then there are some other segments where they talk about, you know, good news, bad news. Sometimes there's a science segment where we focus on what's going on, new advances in science. And that way it's broken up into, if you're only interested in the science portion of the show, you can listen to that however long, 20, 30, 40-minute piece, as opposed to listening to all 3 hour video that's recorded.
Considering your listeners, maybe I should work on that. So did you say you've been a little bit burned out because the episode that you talked about when you're on last was about ReasonCon, which made me sad because ReasonCon is now like 6 months ago, 5 months ago. So what happened, man?
Well, I would say the election happened.
It happened to us all, yeah.
Yeah, and really that's the main thing. I mean, there have been some other things going on. You know, life has stepped in a little bit, and then and other things with scheduling have occurred as well. And then it's just been a situation where, because we're very current event based, everything we talk about has been revolving around Trump lately. And for a time period there, it was no longer, can you believe this ridiculous shit? It was just depressing. And it was to a point where I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I had no sit down and talk about these same depressing ass things over and over and over again. So, you know, I was just like, look, I think I need to take a little break, kind of revitalize and get, you know, my head back into, you know, loving doing this, because I genuinely do love the show and love being a part of the conversations with those, you know, with my co-hosts. But it was a situation where I needed to step away for a little bit. And like when I was talking to you, I was like, holy crap, that's been way too long. I really need to get back into the swing of doing that.
Yeah, when you start shaming Gene and Rachel into, you know, that whole every 2 years thing, we don't really have a Reason Rally next year as far as I know. So, you know, come on, people. Maybe I'll step it up and just make the, you know, I don't know, send them sparkly memes or something to make them feel warm and fuzzy that they'll do this again.
Oh, guilt always works. Guilt always works.
Yeah, unfortunately, I kind of buried the joke that I was going to ask. You know, what happened? Did you like get it on with the main host's ex-wife or something? Is that why you've been off the show for so long?
That would have fit perfectly. I'm like, oddly.
Well, I had a feeling that was going to come up when we first talked about the show, so that's all right. Obviously, way past any bad feelings on that regard. So let me do it. It's going to be premature, but why not? Some nights it's 30 minutes, some nights it's 10. The first live read. So Natalie Newell, who I had on last week, she broke the ground, as far as I know. She was the first person to talk to the hosts of Mythicist Milwaukee about the upcoming, this weekend, MythCon. And by this weekend, I mean like in 2 days, like on the 30th. And that's going on in Milwaukee. And I'm going to have Karen Garst on next week, who's attending, to let me know what actually happens. I guess we'll see a nuclear cloud or something. But so they had the interview that was kind of more, I'd say, nicer. And then Callie of Gay Theist Manifesto, which just dropped today, I'd say buried the motherfuckers. She was very strong against them, bringing on all these YouTube atheists. People talk about YouTube atheists. I just think of people who have a following, and I'm not sure why, and there's just this undercurrent that we've discovered post-Trump and probably pre-Trump of just not good people who want to hate and say mean things, and people take advantage of that. And so I think people should listen to that interview. I know people are probably tired of it. Like, people on the inside are like, oh my gosh, no more drama. But really, I think this is a good one because it lets you know, because a lot of times right now, people will say or do things that upset people, and how they react is really important. Like, the people who are like, oh, I'm sorry, that really upset you, let's talk about it, as opposed to the I'm right, you're wrong, I'm going to stick my feet in concrete and just go with it. And that's what the hosts of Mrs. Milwaukee are doing. And I don't think it's going to serve them in the long term. And I definitely don't want to go to that conference. I was intrigued last year, but I'm kind of wondering what atheist conferences are going to look like. Yeah, I know. Jeannie reminded me that I'm a YouTube atheist. I am. I started on YouTube. I can't get past it. That's me.
Well, and here's, I mean, one of the things that they highlighted multiple times is attendance at different cons and different atheist gatherings. And, you know, when I look back at ReasonCon, we were at capacity. You know, we couldn't bring anyone else in. We were as full as it could be, you know, for that con. And they were talking about how they have the capacity for 1,400, but there are only 400. That right there should be enough to let you know that there are 1,000 people that disagree enough with what you're doing to not even, you know, and even in Callie's interview, she said, I would not be going. You know, this would not be for me. But the refusal to see even that, they think it's something else, that they need to bring these guys in to reach those 1,000 when it's clearly the math works the other way. Those 1,000 aren't showing up because you announced your speakers. They can see who they are.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I feel like, an ongoing thing, although the last ReasonCon definitely was an exception, where conferences are happening and they're being like canceled or they're having to drop because not enough people are interested in it, because dramas happen. But the weird drama is like occasionally they just say, hey, we have this code of conduct, which obviously Mythicist Milwaukee is ignoring, at least regarding one of their hosts or people talking. But yeah, to say it's like, oh, well, Thomas Smith is going to be debating Carl, it's like, well, I know he does a good job, but I feel like there's going to be two people talking over each other. And the people, I don't know, do YouTube people with 500,000 people who threatened like politicians and do awful things and have sick their followers, do they have conferences? I mean, do they even like to meet people in person? That's what I was wondering about, you know, how this is like a new exciting audience for these people.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, you're getting your interaction via social media, and that's, you know, that's where you built your base. So branching out into the brave world of face-to-face communication, especially when we know that everyone is a lot tougher behind a keyboard than they are when it comes to actually sitting down and talking with people. You know, it's one of those situations where, are you going to get the same person? Are you going to get the same talk? Because those ideas are so much more vile when I'm sitting across from you and you're saying them to me versus when you just post them to your channel or you're tweeting them out at me. And, you know, there's no one can reach across the aisle to you. And I mean, literally reach across the aisle to you and have a contact. In terms of that, with the con attendance, I'm curious if maybe there are just too many, and what they need to be is more, you know, like there needs to be like, you know, NanaCon and Skepticon and ReasonCon, but not so many of the different, you know, cons, because it seems like everybody is like, oh, I really enjoy this. I want to get all my friends together. Let me do another one. And they just keep putting these out, and then people aren't able to show up or attend because it's a big drain. I mean, for people to be able to go all over, you know, the country and take time off of work and get hotels. So I'm wondering if it might be a situation of just too many, and we need to focus on a couple of really big, important ones.
Well, that was the point with Reason Rally, although ultimately Reason Rally turned out to be a bit of a failure the second time, because the first time they said they had like 30,000 people and the second time they had 7, which of course I'm like, we both went to ReasonCon and they were like 300 people, and that seemed like an overwhelming number of people. To think of 7,000 or 30,000 is kind of crazy. But yeah, I don't know. There was talk, because I went to the Secular Saturday in Chattanooga, and I think we had 50, 60 people there. So it was kind of a small conference. But in a way, it was just an excuse to get together. That's what ReasonCon is. Like, let's get together and hang out with our podcast buddies. And yeah, we actually listened to some speakers this time, as opposed to the time before where people just hung out in the hall. So it's true. Maybe people just need to say, hey, let's get some people together in an area where we can meet in the middle and hang out. But yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. But well, why don't we bring up? So ReasonCon happened. This was your first. Was it your first like atheist conference, or just you had been to one before?
No, that totally my first atheist conference. Totally my first ReasonCon. My first everything. My first introduction to that large group of people that I listen to every week. All of the above.
And now I'm annoyed because I'm like, we probably met, but there were so many people. And I'm one of those introverts. I'm like, well, I'll talk to the people I already know. And I had a lot of those. But I tried to meet more people. And I had a bunch of beer, so that kind of was, bringing in a certain crowd. That didn't hurt. But I got in trouble because I got Susie drunk in the afternoon. But, what are you going to do? That was going to happen no matter what, by the way.
Some people just have a predilection. I know that you were on the last night when they did the after party, you were in the downstairs of that building you were talking about. I was actually on the stairs. So, I mean, we couldn't have been that far from each other because I was talking to Bryce Blankenagel, who at the time was hammer drunk, and another guy who was former military. And I believe Sharon Frankel was there for a little bit as well because I got to meet her. So it was just this like small little group of people talking while Thomas Smith was just up the stairs watching the Sharks on his phone.
He was watching hockey on his phone. I do remember that. He was just having a time. No, I just knew based on the previous time I went that they had kind of the drink tickets, but they had a really bad beer selection, and apparently mixed drinks weren't that great either. So I just brought a cooler full of beer. And that's how Chris got to be hanging out with me, Podunk. And yeah, a bunch of other people just kind of made my acquaintance. I don't know. I felt like Andrew might have been the drunkest that night, but there was a lot of competition there.
Oh, yeah. I briefly saw Andrew a couple of times, and he had a nice rosy tint to his cheeks. But definite competition in terms of who may have been the Drunk Olympics winner that particular evening.
But I mean, he was talking, Thomas Westbrook, the Holy Kool-Aid, was like talking to him, wanting to get him interviewed. And then Andrew was like, the best interview guy is right there. And he pointed at me, and I was like, okay, this is good. I mean, people can remember me after a few drinks. But he was talking about how they drove down with like the scathing crew, and they were like drinking scotch in the car. It's like, okay, these are professionals. I mean, after all, if you do go to law school, it seems like there are at least 2 classes on drinking, because that's just the thing. They seem to be pretty solid on that one. But other than
that's the only thing you can do to keep yourself fun.
You still you had a good time?
Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of the conversation, getting to meet some people. The talks were phenomenal. Just kind of sitting back and listening to people tell their stories. Callie's talk in general was super informative, really good talk. And then obviously the ending was super special with her proposal. But, it was in general just a really, really good time. And, I would enjoyed it, would definitely go back and, hopefully meet some of the people that I didn't get to meet the first time.
Yeah, there's a certain vibe that was achieved there that's hard to do elsewhere. I mean, I don't know how you do it. There's some kind of magic to it, but when I first thought about this, I was like, wait, Hickory? Because, of course, I heard about the first one when Bobby did the drunk casting, because he was the only sober person at the first one. And it was like every person there was just gathered around a microphone. And they didn't really get that the next 2 times that people tried to record stuff, and they probably did, but they didn't actually do like live shows. But yeah, I was more like, can I just talk to people and not worry about doing a show? I'll do it when I get home.
Yeah, and see, that's the other thing, is the fact that they did have the live GAM, which, I mean, I was sold 100%. As soon as they announced that, it was like, okay, I have to figure out how I'm going to get up there. I knew that Andy was going, so it was a situation where I was like, hey, I'd really like to also go, because I needed to see that. And, when they were setting up for that, they kind of shifted everybody out of the room. Well, I moved up to the very front row, where they had staked out like the reserve seats for their friends and family. And I sat down in the row right behind it, and I was just kind of hanging out while they had the doors closed. And I finally was like, I think they're asking me to leave. So I'm just going to put my name tag on this chair and kind of slink out, because otherwise I think they would have just let me sit there while they were rehearsing everything, you know, in terms of like, we really want you to go, but we're not going to make you go.
Yeah, I just remember they're very liberal at that hotel about people like bringing drinks in. I learned that the first time. I basically was bringing beers down every like 30 minutes to the table, and then this time I brought a lot of bombers with me, so yeah, I had one for the show. You know, you have to know, you know, what you're going to do during the show. You don't want to be thirsty.
Well, that, and they have the single most mean bartendress that's ever existed, who I'm pretty sure is super religious and hates all of us atheists, as she kept the biggest scowl on her face while making every drink possible. So you have to bring your own stuff, otherwise she'll just leave you hanging.
Yeah, I wondered about that. From what I heard from Rachel and Gene, like putting together, that the hotel was really nice, but maybe the people working there were like, wait a second, who are these people again? But we didn't have
quiet about it.
We didn't have, like, the first time 2 years ago, we had like a street preacher and then like a surrounding group of people like, oh, can I debate you? Can I debate you? And then two guys in a minivan with the Christian flag, which was the first time I remember seeing the Christian flag. And actually people came up to them and like said, hey, we have leftover lunch. Do you want some? And like, we're trying to be nice to them because it's like, all right, you want to protest us, go. And then this year, nobody, as far as I could see, was there. So we missed out. I guess they got tired. We're done. We've been there.
They're not listening. We should go.
But one of the shows, as I was probably walking something off, I was listening to Podunk Polymath. So you were on Chris's show a while back. I don't remember exactly when. But he had an episode talking about the prison system. And you've actually been... So your job, you were a corrections officer, is that right?
Yeah, I worked as a corrections deputy for the Brevard County Sheriff, which is the county where I live now, for 2.5 years. And I worked in the county jail that entire time.
So what made you think, hey, this is the kind of job I want to have?
I kind of always had a leaning towards that. My best friend is actually a sergeant for the Melbourne Police Department, which is the local police department in the area where I live. Thing that I think we never really talked about, but we always kind of had an idea that that's where we would go. You know, I'm kind of a bigger guy. Whenever I would go places, I'm usually the person that's like looking to make sure everybody's safe and okay. And, you know, I get in those situations where I put myself between other people in a bad situation. And in that regard, it was, you know, I can go in law enforcement and actually help people. And when I was looking at the different opportunities, one of them was the jail. And I was like, okay, well, I can always work there for a while and transition, which is what our sheriff at the time had done in his career. He worked at the jail, and then after a certain period of time, he transitioned over to the road, moved to the road, did that until he got into the politics side of running for sheriff and, you know, that situation. So that was my goal, was experience all forms of law enforcement and with the sheriff's office and the jail.
Jeannie says you're tall and cuddly. How about that? That's not a question.
Oh no, she knows. I did see her at ReasonCon, so.
Okay, so we mentioned Andrew Torres, and he has like a Patreon bonus for opening arguments where he does laud awful movies, where he talks about really bad movies or movies that don't do the law well. What do you think when you see like a TV show or a movie that depicts what things are like in prison? Do you have things that just pop out and you're like, that's totally not what it's like? Or, oh, wait a second, they got this.
I comment on those things all the time, especially in terms of, I mean, I don't know if you remember, they had like a specific show. It was like Cops-esque, but it was jail or whatever. It was like Spike TV. And I would watch those shows, and situation where certain times they're preening for the camera, and so they do things, you know, just the right way, and it's like, okay, that's how it should be done by the book, which is fantastic. And then other times you're watching it and going, that's not really how that would go down. I applaud what they're trying to do, but, you know, based off of my experience, and everyone's experience is going to be different, so what I experienced in the time that I was in the jail could be totally different than the way other counties or agencies do things. But yeah, I do it all the time. I'll see inaccuracies, or, you know, I'll see things and I'll be like, holy crap, that's actually how, you know, we did things, or that's actually how it looks, or, you know, that's how the environment is when you're there, how you interact with everybody. So, you know, it's hit or miss.
And you mentioned during your show the difference between jail and prison. So I wonder if you could bring that up again.
No problem. It's something that a lot of people don't even realize there is a difference between. And areas also, you know, smaller areas may also be different, but generally speaking, the difference between what a jail and what a prison is your jail is going to be awaiting your trial. So it's a pretrial detention center, and you've been arrested, you have been charged, you're going to spend your time before you see the judge before your arraignment, and then it's going to be decided, you know, are you going to trial? Are you waiting for, you know, additional evidence against you? Are you waiting for the charges to fully be filed against you, you know, for those decisions? And then it also houses people that have been through trial and receive sentences of a year and a day or less. So once you hit the time period of, you know, a year and 2 days, you are sent to prison, and that's where you're going to serve out your sentence. And that goes from a year and 2 days up to, you know, life, depending on the area where you system resides. The other people that go into the jail are people that are in prison serving terms that may be coming back on appeal, or they need to come back to be a witness in another case, or they have additional charges against them and they need to go to court. So it's not solely that. And, you know, there were people when I worked in the jail that we had that were on death row that were back in the jail because they're on appeal, so they had to be there for court. And, you know, we did all varying lengths of sentence, but for the most part, it's a situation where you're either waiting to go to trial or you've been sentenced to a year and a day or less in the jail.
Well, what led to you moving and then attempting to get a job in a new place, and what happened there? Your current location?
Well, actually, I'm back where I was when I worked for the jail. When I left this area, Brevard County, I was married at the time, and my then wife got a really good opportunity to be a basically cooking instructor at a school on the west coast of Florida in the Sarasota area, which is just south of Tampa. And the thought at the time was, I have been in this position for 2.5 years. I have the experience. I can, you know, basically apply elsewhere as long as they have openings. I shouldn't have any problem getting into a jail across the state. And that was the plan, is we would go get her set up, have her go to work, and then established, I would apply and start working as a deputy on the West Coast as opposed to the East. That didn't work out so well.
But why is that?
Well, for the longest time, I wasn't sure. Like I said, I had the experience. I had nothing but glowing reviews on the reviews that I'd had with the Brevard County Sheriff. I'm a smart guy. You know, I'm a people person, especially in that situation where I'd had accommodations for de-escalating and avoiding having to use force. So it was a situation where I thought I was a shoo-in. And so I went in and I did had my conversation with the hiring sergeant, and I went in and I did my psychological evaluation, and you have to do they give you different tests, and you have to sit down and actually talk with a psychiatrist or psychologist. I think that's what it is. And then you have to do like an oral board, and the oral board is where you sit in with multiple people within the organization, and they'll rapid fire questions at you and put you in scenarios and kind of see how you're going to handle certain things they throw at you. And I went through all that, and I was basically the next day I was supposed to go and do my medical evaluation. And once I passed my medical eval, that was the last stepping stone to me officially being hired. I mean, I had a conditional offer of employment. Everything was great. I called to verify what time my medical eval was, and they called me back about an hour later and told me that they were no longer continuing with me through the process, and I was highly confused. The good thing about that situation is records are public. You know, you can go in and request them. I could go in and ask for any officer's public records right now, and short of certain things that they're going to redact, they have to give them to me because it's all available for withdrawal as public record. So I went in and got my results from the psychological evaluation, and part of that is I actually got to take a Wonderlic test, and I thought that was kind of cool just because as far as I was concerned, the Wonderlic is always it's the incoming test for NFL rookies. So I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I get to take the same test, and I'd never taken an IQ test like that before. I did amazingly well on it. I think I was in the top 96 percentile based on my results and how you finish on the test. And then when I looked at what the psychologist had written down, he had me written down as, at being at the highest risk of insubordination and possibly having issues with like alcohol dependence and things like that. Issues that I've never had. I'm not even really that big a drinker. I mean, I can sit down and drink when, I want to, but I'm not like an everyday drinker or anything like that. So I wasn't seeing how they were getting to those conclusions based off of our talk, especially with the insubordination. Like I said, nothing but glowing reviews. I had accommodations from, my previous employer. There definitely wasn't a situation where they could have said, oh, he's insubordinate. And I mean, for years, this really, really bothered me. Figure it out because I kept the results. I would look at them every once in a while, seeing if I had missed something. And, it was a situation where I had what I loved to do taken away from me for no real reason that I could understand. And it wasn't until I was back over in this area and I was on ORLY and we were doing a story about law enforcement agencies disqualifying people that they deemed to have too high an IQ or that essentially were too smart because they felt like the job would be beneath their intelligence and they would leave after short periods of time. So they would put all this time into people and all this money into training, and these people would do the job for a certain amount of time and then leave after, let's say, a year or two because, they're more intelligent than what the position is allowing them to be able to do. And we read this story, and I started, as we were going over and kind of doing it, things started clicking in my head. And I was like, I think this is what happened to me. So I went back and pulled out my results again and went over them again. And I'm starting to link up things in the story with what's in, what I had in my results. I was like, this is definitely what happened to me. I was essentially disqualified from the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office for being too intelligent for the position. Which it always seems a little weird for me to say. Like, I don't want to sound the best, be so egotistical or sound like that. But it's that situation where I had the results in my hand. I know why they disqualified me now. And it was like, I finally felt a little bit at peace because of that.
So do you think you could take the test again and maybe tank a little bit to help your chances?
Be a little bit dumber. I don't know in that situation how, it's one of those, like, would I want to do that? Would I want to go to that county that didn't want me and then be the guy that, I'm always going to be in that situation where it's like, oh man, everybody that I'm with right now that I need to defend me and kind of watch my back is apparently dumb according to this organization.
Well, it's a good point, I guess. Well, you mentioned, I think it was before we got started, the interest in sports and all that. So what are your thoughts on how society's kind of valuing the military and the police, and whether that's necessarily a deserved thing, and how we're kind of viewing military and police, and sometimes people work fire department, and even what you did on like a higher level, at least in theory, than they might deserve?
Yeah, I mean, people, I think, are always a little bit surprised by my view of law enforcement because I was a member of it, but I was not what you hear in the stories all the time. So, like, they say, like, oh, there's good cops out there, you just never hear about them. That was me. I was the guy that you're never going to hear the story about because I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was doing my job. I was making sure that the people I was around, either inmates or other officers, were safe, as best to my abilities and the abilities of those around me. That kind of situation. It's very difficult because I know so many members of law enforcement, and the ones that I know are also really good people. But there are so many instances of those that let the power seemingly go to their head, and those that, for no reason, seem to behave in these manners where it's not in your training. There's no call for you to have to defend yourself from a 9-year-old with handcuffs because you show up to potentially he's throwing rocks at a neighbor's house. It's one of those situations where I can't get into that mindset. I can only look at the potential causes from the outside, and it's one of the things I kind of discussed when I was on Podunk, is that it really needs to be rooted out in the hiring practices. Is when you're looking at these people, where we're hiring from former military, former college athletes, instances where that team mindset and that high adrenaline and do first, think later, or do exactly as you're told, think never, situations, and then you're putting these people out on the street and giving them weapons and basically telling them from the beginning, this is the most dangerous thing you'll ever do, be on high alert 24/7. It's a mixture that doesn't work. Clearly we're seeing it. It's a mixture that needs to be reevaluated, and it can only happen from the hiring practices and the training practices. You're not going to affect anyone who's been doing it for, let's say 5 years on the street, because it's ingrained in them now. That's just there.
Yeah, there's almost this view of the way people see police officers, like, well, like, they feel like they can get away with stuff because they do, and then it leads to bad behavior and people feeling kind of entitled in a way. I mean, I'm family full of like teachers, and they have to just work crazy hours, and no one really gets it because they're like, oh, you get summers off. Yeah, you get like 6 weeks off maybe. And it's a lot different of a job. It's a very stressful job. And yeah, I don't think people quite get what all's involved in it and what can potentially happen because of that. Because I don't think I ever like, oh, you didn't kneel, you don't respect the teachers. That didn't happen at a football game, that's for sure.
Right. And that's the same thing in terms of law enforcement is, the stress that comes from the organization in and of itself, because what you're talking about there with teachers, where it's like, oh, they get 6 weeks off in the summer, but the rest of the time they're constantly working. They may have to provide their own supplies, that type of thing. Law enforcement could be the same way. yeah, they work schedules that allow them time off, but because you have to maintain a certain level of training, you also have to put in a lot of time going to these classes. So you may have a weekend off, but that next week you're going to be on probably 7, 8, 9 days in a row, because your other days off, you're going to have to be at class all day, or you're going to have to go to a training, or, you signed up for, let's say, dive team because it's something you're really interested in, and that dive team has practices on all your off days so that you can actually save someone if the time presents itself. It is definitely a time management scenario as well, in that there's probably not enough law enforcement for the hours needed to police things, but we have to work within the system we have. And so, that goes back to training and those practices to try and teach people how to better juggle that, in terms of, once you get to that breaking point, trying to step away, as opposed to just becoming that person who does something wrong, doesn't get caught, and then feels emboldened because you didn't get caught. So I apparently have a free ride.
Apparently. No. Let's take a just short break. Live read 2. Just wanted to say welcome back. No religion required. They are recording again Wednesday night, so that was last night, and they're talking about the whole NFL taking a knee thing. Gosh, who would ever think someone would want to talk about that? So welcome back, Bobby and Ashley. I believe they've moved to a new location. They actually were in Atlanta, and sadly I didn't get to see them, so it was such a sad situation. So between like hurricanes and being attacked by alligators and stuff, what's it like in Florida?
It's hot. It's so unbelievably hot. I'm not sold either way on Florida as a state. I mean, that's where my family is mostly. I didn't choose to move here. This is, my mom kind of sprung this on us. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, and Florida is where we ended up. I don't hate it. It's just unbelievably hot. My ideal temperature would be like 75 degrees. I get that for like a month, maybe, if I add up all the days. So
yeah, it is rather. I mean, that's one thing about Atlanta is it's just amazingly humid in the summer, and so you get that probably even longer than we do. So congrats on that. Now I heard you, lead up to the show, do 3 different interviews, and they were so different. Usually when I interview someone, it's very narrow field. Like, okay, I got these 4 things to talk about, and that's it. And they're all kind of related. So what was it like for you? You were guest on the sadly currently defunct Polly Askery show. What was it like to be the mono guy on a Polly show?
I really enjoyed being on that show, and I thought it was kind of unique in terms of being the guest, but I got to ask a ton of questions of both Shane and Jeannie, because it was a situation where going in, I looked at the list of their potential topics, and I was like, well, I mean, really the best one for me would be, I am not poly. I don't know a lot about that. It would be awesome if you guys had someone who wasn't, to ask you all the questions that you might run into, or that whatever pops into my head, and then you guys can just kind of go through, and it would be more informational, and it was just a fun conversation that went probably longer than any of us were expecting. We just kept talking and having questions, and it was really good conversation.
Yeah, for me, I don't mind it, because Natalie did that to me last week. When you interview an interviewer, you're going to get asked a question or two. So I don't mind it when the tables are turned. I forget if it was Shane or Jeannie who was like, stay, he's not supposed to ask questions. We are. It's like, it's sometimes better, not always, but sometimes better in a show where you just say, what script? Let's just go and see what happens. So it seemed to be fun.
That was exactly the situation. Is it was one of those where you had three people, 2 of which were hosts, and the guest in that normal co-host role whenever he's actually on a show, and as the conversation kind of shifted, somebody would say something, and it's like, okay, the other 2 people turn and shift and be like, oh, explain that a little bit more. So it was just kind of this interesting dynamic that, like you said, it was totally different than when I was on, Podunk, and it was definitely different than when I'm on O'Reilly, because, then it's more ensemble and you get in your thoughts as they come up within the story. And if that story doesn't hit you, you don't comment. So, it was more just like this nice evolving discussion that we just let happen and recorded.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I'm so sad it's disappeared. I don't know when the last polyascary was, but it seems like we may never see its like again. Shane, it's all your fault, Shane.
I think she'll resurrect. They'll get it all together, and we'll see it rise from the glorious ashes, renewed and ready to go.
Yeah, probably. Jeannie isn't my only person in the chat room if Shane does show up to that interview, so it worked out. And I probably should delete that, because it actually still has in the description for the interview that I interviewed Jeannie and Shane won there. So he's a busy guy. I mean, when he's got a few relationships going on and kids. I don't even know. You do need a lot of Google calendars. I'm like, I need to get my Google Calendar organized. Apparently, that's how you do it. But you find time for what's important to you. That's the bottom line too. And you also mentioned, so what was it a Showtime or Cinemax show that was about poly relationships, and it was not a good representation? And even you knew that. As an outsider to the strange world, the secret handshakes and all that.
Yeah, it was a Showtime show that I believe they just called Poly. It's been a while since I watched it, but I do remember when I watched it, they just seemed to be, instead of highlighting the everyday aspects, it was more because it was Showtime. They just like to show random bits of everybody having sex with each other, and then just whatever drama they could latch onto. And it didn't seem to be, the best, ringing example of what that should be. I didn't look at those people as being like, well, they're all a bunch of, crazy people that just have sex and argue all the time. That can't be how they live their lives, which is, where some of the questions, would come from in that situation. Is I'm not getting a good representation off of this show. So what better way to do that than to sit down with a couple of people who are poly and be like, okay, well, I saw this. How crappy was it?
Apparently pretty crappy. But what's not crappy? This here book. Now, you podcast people won't see what I'm showing, but I have my double autograph copy, and I'm missing at least one other autograph, the PC Lie. So Marissa McCool wrote this book, and Marissa does interesting things, in addition to doing 12 shows a week and writing a book every month. Marissa writes a book, but then she asks people to contribute. So how did you get into this book? Let's see, page 259, I think, is what I see.
Yeah, I believe I follow the Eli Bosnick entry.
No audio is better than me flipping pages in a book, right? Maybe me opening a beer. Sorry. It's just
sound effects.
Yeah.
But I actually asked to be in that book. I believe, I'm trying to remember because I was thinking about it today. I believe I was introduced to Marissa because I'm friends with Eli, and I think I saw a post that he liked or shared that was talking about her book when she was putting it out. And so I looked at it and I saw what it was about, and I had written my response to the Trump election, and I knew that my other co-host Amber, who's also one of the contributors to the PC Lie, had written a response, and we had read them on O'Reilly. And so I had reached out to Marissa and said, hey, if you're interested in people contributing, I have 2 potential responses. I needed to ask Amber if it was okay to send hers, but I was like, I have 2 potential responses. I could send them to you. Neither one of them is super long. I think that they fit in with exactly what you're looking for. And, she was all for it. She said, absolutely, send them over. I'll check them out. Then I got in touch with Amber and I was like, hey, do you want to submit your response to this book? I sent everything over. they looked at it, and then the next thing I knew, I was on the cover as a contributing author to this book. And I immediately ordered my copy, made sure I got the autograph version from Marissa herself, and I was just super excited that something I had written at 2-3 o'clock in the morning in a fit of anger was now a published piece. Weirdly, I've also contributed to the next book she put out, which was False Start. It was a piece that I wrote specifically for my wife in regards to mental illness and how someone that doesn't necessarily live in that world does whatever he can for someone that does. And it turns out that I was able to also at least broker somewhat of the connection between Marissa and my co-host Amber, who's actually now her editor. So the editing company that Marissa uses is Amber's company.
Look at that. That's the whole atheist community kind of helping each other out and doing some business together. Nothing wrong with that. Because, some of us are making a real go of it, doing this content creation. Some of us just do it for fun on the weekends. So do you think you'll ever go solo, do your own show, or you just, ORLY is enough for you?
I had considered it, and I have like 3 or 4 recorded shows that I was going to do. And I just kind of sat down and recorded solo. Each one was about a half an hour or so. And I just never, so the audio wasn't the greatest on them. So I was going to need to re-record, and I never picked it back up. So, I've had ideas. Right now, like I said, I really need to get back into being a better contributor to ORLY, since everything that I've been able to do since then is because of the fact that I first got a taste of it with ORLY. And I, just miss being on the show. In addition to that, I actually have, I've been working with some of the people from ORLY and Amber, who's running this other project that we're going to be working on, and it's something that we're calling Hideous Fiction. We have a Facebook page that people can check out that's new, so it doesn't have a lot of content on it yet, but it's growing. And basically what Hideous Fiction is for the last couple of months, we have voted as a group on a story prompt. And once we have the story prompt, we're writing short bits of microfiction, anywhere from up to about 3,000 words, and kind of in the horror, thriller, suspense genre. And what we're going to do with those is going to be recorded by voice actors out of Orlando area, and that's going to be what is heard on the podcast. And we're going to listen to one of the stories and then have the authors kind of break it down, offer critiques to the other authors, and just kind of give their overall impression. And then once we have, a nice little grouping of stories, they're going to be released as like an ebook via all the major, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, that kind of thing. So it'll be like quarterly collections of all of our short stories together. So just another compilation author credit that I'll get to, put out there and say, hey, I did a thing. Everybody should check it out.
Well, right now we're dealing with like hideous reality. So I'm all for hideous fiction.
And I actually, I work that into one of my stories. As a tiniest bit of inside baseball in regards to that, one of our prompts that we just did was, basically when your phone alarm goes off to wake you up in the morning, you see a headline across your, notification bar. If you snooze the phone, the headline changes. You can snooze it 3 times, and that final headline is what is the reality you live in. So
it could get better, it could get worse.
Exactly. And so, I kind of worked in our current reality a little bit to that story, because there's nothing scarier than what we're living under right now. honestly probably not that far away from the old 50s, like, okay guys, we're going to do our little bomb drills, everybody under your desk.
Duck and cover. Oh boy. Yeah. So the other show I listened to that you're on had nothing to do with politics or atheism or anything like that. What is a psychotronic film?
So a psychotronic film is a niche genre of kind of like cult films, horror, that can be action, any of those like smaller, when you think about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's a classic now. When you look at that, you don't think of it as being a cult film. But that film was made for, like, I want to say $30,000 was the initial budget. Yeah, and so when you're looking at films like that, it's like these films, yes, they've gained a following and they've grown, but they initially started as gambles in terms of filmmaking. And so it's just looking at things like that. And there's actually a list. This podcast is hosted by two guys, Justin and Gary, that I actually met, again, due to somebody that we had on our show. He's friends with them. I saw that they were doing a movie review podcast. I was like, okay, I'd like some different entertainment. Let me go ahead and give them a listen. And what they introduced, it was originally called A Slice of Fried Gold, and it was just any movies. They kind of focused on their favorites, and they came across this book about psychotronic films, and it was basically an author who was focusing on the lesser known films and films that he thought had merit and value and that people should watch. So basically these cult horror thriller action films that, if you were going to make a list of must-see movies that maybe people hadn't heard of, these are the films that would be on those lists. And they had read the book, and they were like, maybe we should do that instead of just another movie review podcast that's doing the same movies all of the time. And so they kind of rebranded and shifted a little bit. And since I've been listening from day one of A Slice of Fried Gold, and I'd been in contact with them, I've talked with them about the different movies because I love film and kind of watching movies. It worked out that I was going up to the South Carolina area. That's where they record out of. And, I got to talking with them, and I was like, I'd love to be on the show. And it just, I went, sat down and recorded a super fun, awesome conversation about the movie The Frighteners by Peter Jackson.
Yeah, that reminded me of my 90s time when I would do these freak movie nights, and it'd be like a combination of either horror or blaxploitation. And I think my favorite of either was a Dolomite 2, because Dolomite was like a rapper in the 70s, and he had these movies that were just over the top bad but hilarious at the same time. And then 80s low budget horror movies. Evil Dead 2 is the one. I still have that on DVD. And I sadly don't do that as much as I used to. It's just the over the top, but they had some humor to them. And it was weird seeing that Frighteners, because Peter Jackson, I saw his early stuff, Dead Alive and Meet the Feebles, and then to see him become this big star was a little jarring, because oh, this is the guy who just did movies in his backyard for a while. And I was glad to kind of make that kind of connection. And now I want to watch the Frighteners just because I saw, I saw some trailers, but I never went to see the movie. I missed out.
It's one of those that some people know, and like myself, I have always loved that movie. I think, and I mentioned it a little bit on the show, I think one of the reasons why I love that movie so much is I will always have that Michael J. Fox bias, where if he's in something, to me, he's just good every time he's in something. He kind of molds himself. Yeah, he's always going to be Marty McFly, but he just molds himself to what he's doing, and he kind of fits into every scenario. So I just enjoy watching him. And, so I have that Michael J. Fox bias, and then it's this cool kind of ghost story, mystery, so many things going on all at one time. And I've always enjoyed it. So when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do for the show, because instead of it being a situation where they're like, okay, the week you're here, we're talking about this movie, they let me choose. And they generally do with their guests. They let them choose what they're going to be watching. So I had to sit down and really think about it. And I was like, what do I think would be the most fun to go in there and talk about? And I happened to, I think I had read something or seen something not too long before, and I was like, holy crap, I haven't seen that movie in like 5 years. I need to watch it immediately. Let's do this one. And I think it led itself to good conversation. And I mean, it was super fun. Like you said, it's not politics. It's not religion. It's completely different, just entertaining, sit down with your buddies and have a conversation about a movie.
And now just there's so much stuff on TV. There's so many different channels that you almost in a way feel like, oh, it's a waste of time to rewatch a movie. But I haven't seen Pulp Fiction probably in 15 years. I need to do that. Like every once in a while I watch like The Big Lebowski and stuff like that. It's like these movies have these rewatchability. Some movies you see once, you're like, all right, I'm done. But these movies are kind of fun to rewatch. Now we've passed the hour time, but I can't go without asking the final question. Well, we'll see if this is the final question. Have you finally finished your binge listen of Cog Dis? Are you finished? Do you know what's happening? And no spoilers.
I am completely caught up. I think I don't have any back. I think the only shows I have back listens are Thomas Smith's show, Serious Inquiries Only. Everything else, I believe, like a Scathing Atheist, I'm caught up on. Cog Dis, I'm caught up on. Since I've been listening to GAM since like their first episode, I don't have any back issues or back episodes there. I would say I have back episodes of your show, but the podcast player that I use only starts at like 93. So I was like, okay, I don't have that many, back episodes that I can access right now. I'm going to have to find those elsewhere.
Yeah, it's weird because I swear when I interviewed Scathing, I found, maybe I had to go to their website to get the first episode. Basically, you go to Podbean or you go to YouTube, you can catch up. Although with YouTube, it's a little annoying because you can't like listen and really do anything else at the same time. We like to multitask while we podcast, right? It's very important. And was it jarring for you? Because Cecil and Tom like pretend they're these like fat ass guys, but they like are super sculpted. Just want people to know that in case that's not out there.
I had seen a picture before ReasonCon, so it's not like I went into ReasonCon and was completely blown away by the fact that Tom looks like a miniature lumberjack. Like if he was taller, he would be what people vision as a lumberjack, just minus the beard. I mean, he is cut as hell. He's ridiculous. But had I not seen that picture, I would have believed them based off of the self-deprecating. They're always like, oh, we're so fat. And, you listen to their voices and you're like, those are just kind of regular guys. I could see them being like, two big old guys. They're just kind of sitting around hanging out and talking. And like I said, when I saw them, I was like, no fucking way. Especially because their voices too even is like when you hear Tom talk, you're hearing it come out of Cecil's face. Like their voices are swapped in terms of they sound like the other one looks.
That is true. You definitely have to get used to the faces and the voices. I know Noah, Noah and Heath, I never saw them before ReasonCon, so I had no idea. And I was like, oh yeah. And the fact that they lived in Georgia, but they didn't have accents. So I was like, wait, what are you doing down there? It was a confusing little trip.
When Scathing and Noah was the first atheist podcast I was introduced to. So I listened to back episodes of ORLY to kind of get ready to be on that show and just kind of enjoy that. And that was really the first podcast I listened to. And then Andy, when they had the bombing in Paris and Noah had that angry diatribe, I mean, he just went off. That was probably the angriest diatribe I've heard Noah have. And he was like, you have to listen to this. So I listened to it and I was like, okay, I have to listen to this guy talk more. I'll tell you the vision I had in my head. The Mad Money guy from CNN or whatever, that balding, angry. Mm-hmm. That's what I had in my head as a vision for what I thought Noah looked like. I was wrong.
Noah's flowing locks are something to appreciate. And he's a skinny dude. And the first year, I don't know if he did it the second year, he was like playing the piano and doing like magic tricks, and he used to juggle professionally. It's like, yeah, he's got more skills than you'd realize. So before we call it a night, is there anything you'd wanted to talk about? And of course, where can people find you online and all that good stuff?
No, I mean, I really appreciate you having me on and getting the chance to talk about, the different things and kind of, talk through things with you. And, we'll have to do this again sometime and just kind of focus in on the sports thing. We didn't even get into that. I've heard you talk about the Nashville area and going to Titans games. And since the Titans are my favorite football team, I feel like we would have a lot to discuss there.
I have to bring you on my other show. It's sort of Titans focused, but mainly sports and social stuff.
Yeah, if you have a Titans focused show, I need to be on that like tomorrow. But yeah, it's Sundays are always the worst for me as I'm sitting there watching with anxiety, doing what I want them to do. I was super happy with the Seattle game, and I'm a little nervous about Houston, but we'll see how that works out. And other than that, like I said, I just really appreciate the chance to come on, talk to you. Really good conversation, kind of go over the things I've done, and situations where I'm not super big on talking about myself, but maybe people should go and listen to me because I'm that level of awesome that people need in their lives. Other than that, you can find me in the normal places. ORLY is available on any of your major podcast catchers. We're on iTunes. We're on Google as well, so you can catch it there. I am 52 and earlier, down to about 84, I believe was the first one I said. And then definitely check out those other shows I was on as well. Podunk Chris has got a really good show, and I enjoy the conversations he has. And for anybody that just wants that quality entertainment, please check out my friends on the Psychotropic Film Society, because it's the movies that they do, maybe not everybody knows, and they'll give you a good breakdown, and it just makes you kind of want to watch these films that maybe you haven't heard of. I'm on Twitter or Fred, and I'm on Facebook, just my name, Fred Sims. So, if you want to find me on Facebook and be friends, I'll have talks with you. I'll probably get into conversations based on things you post. And it's all the normal stuff.
Well, all links will be included in the show notes. I have show notes, people, and you should check them out. So do that. Now, if you want to support this show, be like Bobby, Hugh, Teody, and Marissa. I'd say Bobby and Teody have swapped smoothie recipes. So they've been really hitting those up on Facebook. And, of course, Hugh Man will be excited because Atlanta United just clinched the playoffs in soccer. And trust me, soccer's a big deal here. We sell out 70,000 people. It's insane. And Marissa, of course, PC Line, all that, and 50,000 other shows. So go to patreon.com/Zachrilege, Zachrilege. I can spell it after 2 beers. So can you? Follow me on Twitter @Zachrilege. Like my Zachrilege cast page on Facebook. Send all love mail. And if you have any guests you think should be on the show, zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. And yeah, unlike normal, I actually have a guest for next week, Karen Garst, Faithless Feminist. She's going to be at Mythicist Milwaukee Con this weekend, and is going to talk to me next week. So we'll see what day we get that done, but that'll be what we have to look forward to. So thank you, Fred, for being on tonight. And for the listeners, stay safe. If you need to chat, I'm available. If you're an atheist and you feel alone, you are not alone. Reach out. Let's chat and get that human connectedness that keeps people coming back every Sunday. Stay skeptical. I love all y'all, and gong sound.